Welcome, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Empower Hour with Isabel Starck. I am your hostess, Isabel Starck. So excited to have you here today. For those of you who are joining in live and would like to join the conversation, make sure that you can type in your questions in the side chat box, and we would be happy to take them live and get them answered for you. Now, if you are actually watching this podcast, it's probably because you've seen something about it and you know that sex is the topic today. So I'm really excited to actually introduce to you Serra, who's a sexual empowerment coach. And Dawn and I met in one of the Facebook groups. I really can't remember which one, but we met in a Facebook group. She had posted something and I immediately had to reach out to her and say, oh my God, we need to talk. It took us a few weeks to finally connect, but once we did, I knew I had to have her on the show. So I want to go ahead and introduce to you Serra. I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about herself and then we'll get started.
Yay, thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here. Hi, everybody. I am Serra, and I work with sex. I also work a lot with communication and relationships and confidence because they all tie together. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about is helping people, usually women, to really discover and explore kind of what sex means on their own terms, because so many people feel just really stuck. Like there's got to be something more, or there's something missing, or they feel guilty that they don't want sex more, or they want to ask for something and they don't know how to do that because sex can be scary. So I work with people who really kind of want to open that door and see what's on the other side. And then we have super fun adventures. So I'm really excited to be here and answer your questions and talk to you.
Super. So it sounds like we're opening Pandora's box a little bit.
Yes. Who knows what will happen?
Well, you guys can tell, and actually when Dawn and I first connected, she's like, oh, yes. So today I'm actually channeling, Robert Palmer. I've got the whole thing going on. My hair, I've got the red lipstick. I purposely wore no makeup today so that you guys can see me all natural, but I needed the red lips.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're really excited. I know this is going to be, we already have a few questions that people sent in ahead of time, so we'll get started with those. But for those of you who are watching live and you would like to ask a question, all you have to do is click the bottom box here that basically says join the conversation. Once you connect to that, it'll pop up another window and take you to the Google Plus page. Once there, you will hover over either this area, and you will then click on the 9 Google Squares. Q&A app will pop open. Click on that, and then you'll have a side panel open up, and you can type in your questions. I'll be able to see them live. We'll be able to select them, and then Dawn will actually answer them live for you. So please, please, please feel free to add your questions in the chat box, and we will get to those as we go. So, oh my God, where do we start?
I know, all of the sex talk.
All heightened up. Well, you know what? One of the things I'd like for you to tell us a little bit more about, and we'll get to this at the end as well, we'll just kind of recap, but we were briefly talking about your podcast show, and it's called Sex Gets Real. And I think you have a big win to share on that you just announced a little bit ago. So please share.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, we've been doing the podcast since January of 2014. We are just about to hit our 75th episode, and we also just recently cracked the top 20% of all podcasts. So we're really excited about that. Yeah, it's been fantastic, especially because we haven't spent any money on advertising yet. So it's just all been like word of mouth and listeners sharing and searching and all that kind of stuff. So it's been an amazing journey, and we've got some really wonderful, loyal listeners. And if anybody's interested, I will say, it's a very frank, raw discussion about sex. So folks who are kind of shy might be a little shocked about what we talk about, but it's all in the spirit of just being really real and open and exploring things. And we've got all kinds of great experts that come on. So we'd love for you to check it out.
Awesome. So again, it's called Sex Gets Real. And I'll probably include the link into that later on in the whole details of this episode. So stay tuned for that. All right. Well, I always have a number of questions that I like to ask every single interviewee because it's really good to get a different perspective. So as we're talking about, sex, and I normally talk about success. And that's like being successful in your life. Like, I'm wondering for you, how is it that you define success? Maybe sexual success in your own words.
Yeah, that's a really good one. So sexual success for me really is feeling like I'm in alignment with what my needs and my wants are and getting those met. It's feeling like I can explore things and try things, and if I mess up, it's all okay. And it's about tapping into my joy and my pleasure and my desire and really like claiming those. And I think that's the big piece that so many of us miss is we are entirely responsible for our own pleasure. So it's not on somebody else in order to do that for us. We have to know what feels good, what we want. We need to ask for it. And when we really become a champion for ourselves and we say, yeah, it's important for me to feel good, and it's important for me to ask for what I want, and it's important for me to find what, is my pleasure and my desire. That to me is just the ultimate success when it comes to sex. And of course, that means sexual success can be with yourself on your own or with a partner, but it's about, really tapping into what am I craving? What do I want? And then giving yourself permission to do that. And I think that's one of the funnest journeys to go on for yourself.
Awesome. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey to actually get there? Because how is it that somebody turns out to be a sexual empowerment coach? Like, tell the viewers.
Yeah, that's it's been a really, really fantastic journey for me. And I think for a lot of people who are in some type of service industry, they tend to have this really a story where kind of things came together almost like fate, but at the same time, there were all these obstacles and challenges. And I think my story really fits in with that. So I was raised in a household where talking about sex was really normal. My mom was really open about sex. I had books about sex and how babies were made from the time I was a really young kid. I was that person that all my friends came to when they needed sex advice. If they needed condoms and they were too afraid to buy them themselves, I would buy them for them. They knew I could ask my mom questions about things their parents would never tell them. So I was kind of that gatekeeper for safe sex conversations.
Well, how valuable to have that. I mean, really. I mean,
yeah.
This generation, I think, well, I don't know. I guess every generation is going to have that. Mm-hmm. But I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, it was really great. And then on top of that, I also found that I was really struggling with a lot of things when it came to sex. And I felt like I didn't deserve to be desired and I didn't deserve sex because I'm in a fat body. And I had trouble asking for what I wanted. I have some sexual assault trauma. And so that really made me feel silenced, like I wasn't allowed to ask for what I wanted or I didn't deserve it. And so a big part of my journey was kind of reconciling this openness about sex and this comfort in talking to everybody else about it. But then when it came to my personal life, feeling really silenced and small. And so I really had to go on a journey of self-discovery and giving myself permission to learn how to love my body and learning how to ask for what I wanted, that it was okay to make mistakes, and kind of pulling those two things together really brought me to this place where I feel like, it's just in my DNA at this point to help people go on those journeys and to be able to explore sex and talk about it in a way that feels good.
That's awesome. Now, how does your mom feel about your chosen profession now?
She loves it. She loves it. I think there's definitely aspects of it that are a little bit outside her wheelhouse now. But she definitely loves just kind of asking me how it's going and finding out, what the latest kind of questions are that I've gotten from people. And she listens to my podcast. So it's a fun relationship that we have.
That's great. Well, you could probably even have her as a guest on your podcast. I mean,
not sure the world is ready for that, but it would be fun.
Stay tuned, world. Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really awesome. Yes, so I do agree that we all we go through this journey to lead us to where we're at, but we're always constantly in a journey. So if you feel that you've already arrived, you haven't.
Yes.
It's continual. We keep learning. You mentioned to me that you're going to this sex conference and that sex conference. If you're doing something that you're passionate about and that you love, you just keep learning is just, like you said, almost part of your DNA. You just want to soak up as much information so you can help your clients.
Yeah.
So that's, it's really great. Really awesome.
Yeah, I love it. I love waking up every morning.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Or maybe just staying in bed a little bit.
Well, sometimes they're the same.
Oh gosh, so I see that a few people have actually joined in. If you guys do want to ask a question, just remember to click on the box here that says join the conversation. Once you get to the next window, click on the 9 Google squares, either here or here, and open up the Q&A box. Type in your question. I'll be able to see it on this side and make sure I have Dawn answer it. So let's get to some of the questions that were actually asked. I know that we recently posted this in a Facebook group and we got some comments on there. And the question I'm paraphrasing here, but the question had to do with taking supplements and whether that affects a man's libido. It's a women's group that we're in, and she stated that she's actually been taking supplements and her libido seems to be turned in a different direction. So would you like to kind of comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's it's a great question. And I definitely think that is something that if it becomes a problem for him, his libido, talking to his doctor is probably a great idea, and just getting all of his levels checked to make sure that there's nothing going on. So there's 2 kind of answers that I have for this question. The first is there are a lot of people who think that there are a number of supplements out there who can really that can really help with your libido, like maca powder is one of them. I haven't seen any scientific studies that support that finding. I've seen scientific studies that have tested it and found no correlation. That's not to say that it doesn't, but that is to say that as far as the information that I was able to find didn't show concrete evidence that it can impact your libido one way or the other. So I think that there's probably more research that needs to happen there.
I have a question though, that you mentioned.
Sure.
Because years ago, I remember actually having maca. And, there was some kind of sensation, something going on. Do you think it has more to do with your mind knowing that you're taking something for this?
Yep. I think that's exactly it. I think that a big part of, so I saw the question that she asked, and it's a really good question. And I think part of it is if she's taking supplements and she's feeling terrific, it's probably because she's really prioritizing self-care and she's putting herself first. She's taking care of herself. So that's going to give you this sense of control and freedom and remove some of that stress. And of course, that's going to usually translate to improved libido. So she also mentioned that her guy was under a lot of stress. So stress is the #1 libido killer in the world, the #1. And if you're under a tremendous amount of stress, or I've also seen studies that say if you're drinking a lot of alcohol or doing any kind of drugs, and of course anything that has to do with like antidepressants can impact your libido, all of those things can impact your levels of desire. So there is this wonderful PhD named Emily Nagoski, who's written a book called Come As You Are. It's one of the best books on the market, and it's packed full of all these wonderful medical studies and scientific studies. And what it shows is that there's 2 different kinds of desire. There's spontaneous desire, which is you see something sexy and like immediately you're turned on, which is kind of how we see guys. And then there's responsive desire, which means you actually have to get some type of stimulus happening in order to start feeling aroused. And there's lots of data around it that I won't go into right now because it would take too long. But if you're under a lot of stress, that actually is like putting the brakes on when you're driving your car. So you can hit the gas as much as you want, but if you're standing on the brakes, you're not going to go anywhere. So I would say that adding supplements isn't necessarily a bad idea, and it might help. But what I think the bigger issue is probably mindset and stress. So if there's ways to reduce stress in your life, to add self-care, to kind of ask for help in a way that feels really good, oftentimes my clients see a big shift in their libido once they start kind of shifting that mindset.
All right, so give us some tips to raise a man's or lower a man's stress level, which just everybody needs some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, So for women, so I'll start with for women. So often at times women kind of feel like they have to do it all. They have to be it all. They have to run the house. They have to be the mother. If they've got kids, they have to have the successful business. They have to look amazing. And it's this burden that just weighs on them that they have to do it all and without asking for help. And so a big way that you can shift that stress is to start asking your partner to support you and kind of give specifics. You know, it would make me feel so much better if I came home and I didn't have to worry about the dishes. Is that something that you can help me with? Because that would make me feel a lot more relaxed. Guys tend to, and I'm being very general with this, but guys tend to feel a lot of stress around being the man, being the provider, being the strong support that never has to ask for help, that never breaks, that never needs to lean on anybody. So if he is feeling a lot of stress in his life, I think it's worth just kind of asking him, what can I do to support you? Or what's going on that we can do that would create some space for you? You know, maybe he's afraid to really say all the things that are going on because he's afraid he's going to get emotional and that makes him look weak. So, you know, we all have these internalized messages about all the ways that we're not good enough. And that can completely wreak havoc on our sex lives and how we feel about sex, because you don't feel very sexy when you feel like you're not good enough. So if he's under a lot of stress, I think that kind of isolating, does it have to do with his job? Is there a way you guys can take like a road trip and just get him out of his head? Has he not been working out as much and that's a good escape for him? Has he really clammed up and he just needs to share something? So it's a matter of just really being curious and then making sure that he feels like if he, you know, appears weak or fails, that you're still going to be there for him and still love him. And that can do a lot to create that space.
Yeah, I think that positive reinforcement is important. But what do you also think about maybe nonverbal tips? Because as we know, we are dealing with men, and a lot of times men have an issue expressing their feelings or how they feel. Like you said, maybe there's pride or they're embarrassed or they're supposed to be the man and handle everything.
Yeah.
So what kind of other tips are you thinking?
So I'm gonna offer two different things. The first is I've found that for a lot of people, it's easier to write down what's going on. So inviting some type of like email exchange or writing letters to each other where you kind of say the scary stuff can actually be a little bit of a safer way to approach some of that. For two reasons. One, you can really take your time and nobody's just kind of staring at you while you're trying to figure out what to say. And two, because you can, you know, change things after they're written before you send them or hand them over. So that's one thing. The other thing is, you know, ask him if there's some type of physical comfort that you can give him or something like that. And there's something by Gary Chapman called the 5 Love Languages. Now, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the stuff underneath it because it's just not the way I approach my life. But there is a quiz that you can take that tells you how you like to receive love. And the same thing kind of actually plays into with sex in that we tend to do sex and do love the way we want to receive it. Mm-hmm. So our partner might not want to receive it that way. And that can actually feel not loving and not sexy when you kind of put that on them. So I think it's just a really great idea to ask him, like, what would make you feel really good? Can I give you a massage? Is there a way I can, you know, touch you that makes you feel supported? Do you want to cuddle? And by offering those things, it's a little bit less risky than making him ask for them. So it's really just about lending that support and creating a space that's really safe so he can say, actually, yeah, I think cuddling sounds really nice tonight, because he might not just ask for that on his own.
Right, or just doing it, like just doing it. And because even verbalizing it sometimes, even saying the yes might be a little bit too much. So I think that's those are great tips. And you actually touched on something that reminds me of a post that you made earlier this week. Mm-hmm. Defining your ideal lover. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, would you like to elaborate on that a little bit? Or?
Yeah, so I did this exercise that I had over 70 people take advantage of, which was really fun, just to kind of see everything that came in. And the way that you do it is you sit down and you make a list of the 10 qualities that you want in your ideal lover, and they can't be physical. So you're looking for behaviors or things like that, like kindness or a sense of humor or generous, those kinds of things. And once you get that list written out, not only are you really clear on, wow, these are all the things that really I love having in a relationship, but when you reflect on it and you ask yourself, when I'm at my best, when I'm most rested and feeling cared for, 98% of the people that replied to this for me actually said yes to this question, which is, when you look at those 10 qualities of your ideal lover, is that you? And the answer is almost always yes. And that is so important to know, because what's really under that is you are your own best lover and you are the only partner you're going to have for life. So it's on you to really learn what you want, learn what you need, get to know your body, get to know yourself, get to know your needs, and then model those things in your relationship. So one of the things that, is a lot of the work that I do with my clients is, if they say, we never talk about sex, he never tells me what he's feeling, or we always break into a fight when this happens and then we both close down. If you can start modeling whatever it is that you want, so if you can start saying sexy things, if you can start sharing sexy thoughts, and you show, I'm willing to take this risk, would you be willing to take it with me? Most people are going to respond with a yes, but sometimes they need to actually see you do it first. So that can be another thing to try is, if he's closing down or not kind of responding to your questions, then maybe by you opening up first and saying, well, here's some ways that I would really love to be touched, or I really feel supported when I'm stressed out. How about you? That feels a heck of a lot safer than, how do you like to be touched when you're stressed?
Right.
Kind of on the spot.
Whole energy is different.
Yeah.
We're most vulnerable, right? I mean,
Yep.
when we are lovers, is when we are at our most vulnerable. So great tips. Yeah, I actually really enjoyed that exercise. And,
yeah.
Yeah,
It's really powerful. Like, we don't think of ourselves in the most positive light most of the time. Most of the time our thoughts are around our little wins and then all the ways that we're not good enough or we're failing. But to actually look at a list of kind, generous, loyal, giving, enjoys, sarcasm, whatever it is. And then realizing, holy crap, I just actually described myself when I'm having, when things are really going well for me. That's really empowering to see. You bring a lot to the table.
Mm-hmm. No, totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad I kind of led into that, because I think that's a great little exercise to do if you guys haven't ever had a chance to actually do that. It's it's pretty good practice. But I guess we gave it away at the end. So.
Yeah, that's okay.
All right, you can still
make the list. It'll still be a surprise.
So yeah, that was one of the questions that came in. I'm going to pop over there and take a look again and see what else has been coming in. Okay, well, since actually we were already talking about libido, so this question actually has to do with low libido. And what should you do if you don't really want sex the way you used to?
That is probably one of the number one things that clients come to me with. So there's kind of two answers to that. The first is, if you have had a somewhat stable libido, ups and downs, but somewhat predictable for a while, and then there's a sudden change, and like overnight change, and suddenly it's just completely gone, or it's completely through the roof. That's probably when you want to go to see a doctor and just make sure that your hormone levels are okay, and that, on the inside, from a health perspective, that things are looking good, because certain things that can happen will impact your libido. So you just want to make sure that you're healthy. Now, if it's been kind of a slow decline, things were really hot and heavy at the beginning of your relationship, and, you've just kind of gotten to a point where sex is kind of the last thing on your to-do list all of the time, that is so normal and so common. And there is this really, really strong myth out there that something is wrong with your relationship if you're not having the right amount of sex. And I say the right amount of sex in quotes, because no study has ever been able to show what the right amount of sex is. The right amount of sex is what feels good to you and your partner. And so there's going to be certain relationships where once a year feels great, and that's what you want. There's going to be other relationships where 2 times a day feeds you, and that's when you feel most connected. And then there's going to be, you know, other relationships where it's somewhere in the middle, maybe a couple of times a week or a couple times a month. So
did you say once a year?
Yeah, there's lots of folks out there who are either asexual or are on the asexuality spectrum, and, you know, sex just isn't an important part of their lives. And so they either never have sex or rarely have sex, and that feels really good. So if you've got 2 people who are both in that spot, that can be really healthy. So it all depends on really your sexuality and how you express it. Now, if your libido isn't where you want it to be, and you're either feeling guilty about it or bad about it, and you just want to know what happened to it, I'm going to go back to Emily Nagoski for a minute and talk about the dual control model. So for most women, not all, but for most women, we have what's called responsive desire. And what that means is we actually need something to start stimulating us in order to start feeling aroused and wanting sex. And that kind of runs in the face of all of the cultural myths that are out there and all those magazine titles that we see, which is there's this assumption that you just like magically are turned on and want sex the second somebody starts touching you. But science and vast amounts of science have shown that's actually not true. So the way the dual control model works is we have brakes and accelerator, just like in a car. And oftentimes when we're thinking about our libido, we're just thinking about all the ways to turn ourselves on, and that's stepping on the accelerator. But what's often a more important part of that puzzle that completely gets neglected in all of the stories and all of the advice that we see out there is what's going on with your brake pedal. So your brake pedal can be you're super busy. Your brake pedal can be you haven't done any self-care lately. It can be that you're super stressed about something going on in your relationship or something going on with your family, or work is just really overwhelming right now. You know, brakes are a little bit different for everybody, so I'm just kind of generalizing. But when you start figuring out what it is that's standing on your brakes, and then you also figure out what turns you on, you can start to kind of play with that balance so that you find a place where you can move forward when you want to move forward, or, you know, get turned on when you want to get turned on. So I would say if you aren't really wanting sex anymore, that most of the time really has to do with the fact that you are probably feeling tired, anxious, exhausted, like you've got a lot on your plate, and that's just all stuff weighing down on your brakes. And so you're not going to go anywhere, even when sexy time is, you know, laid out in front of you. It's going to be really hard to get turned on. So if you can start finding ways, and that's something I work with so many people about, is we start trying to find ways, one, what are the brakes? And for some people, like I have a client who every time she started doing something sexy with her fiance, the dogs would jump up on the bed. And for her, that was actually the brakes, because it would get her completely out of the moment, and she'd have to knock the dogs off the bed, and then she'd kind of be starting from zero again. And by then kind of felt like the mood passed, and so they would give up. And so actually identifying that as, hey, that's actually one of your brakes. So if we lock the dogs out of the room and you actually have that nice ramp up without the interruption, what happens? And they experienced a wonderful shift. So you want to figure out ways to pull off the brakes, and then you also want to figure out ways to put on the accelerator. So what are the conditions that make you feel really good and present? You know, it might be getting a massage from your partner. It might be taking a bubble bath. It might be, you know, eating something that just feels really luxurious. It might be dancing, because that gets you into your body. It might be watching an erotic film or watching porn, or, you know, reading sexy stories to each other. I'm a huge fan of sexting. So when you're headed into like date night, sending each other little flirty texts, that kind of like primes the pumps a little bit. So, you know, that's one of the main things that I think folks want to focus on if their libido is going down, is identify what's really kind of putting those brakes on and dampening things, and what are the ways that you like to be aroused, and then play with the balance of those things. And it's going to take some experimenting. And I think a lot of people give up when they try 1 or 2 times and they're like, well, that didn't work. Well, sometimes it takes a lot of different experiments in order to find what's successful for you. So just give yourself permission and know you're totally normal. You know, this happens to everybody. Our libidos go all kinds of different ways throughout our lives. So, you know, our libidos are high when we first get into a relationship. They go down when the reality kind of starts sitting in. When we go on vacation and we feel way less stressed, our libidos go up again. When we get back home, they go down again. So that's completely normal. It's all just figuring out what's going on, and then you can actually start to take control.
Now, how much of that actually has to do in your mind? Because I know that you can set the mood, you can like have everything set up, but if your mind is on the dishes and your husband or your spouse is doing everything right, if your mind is not connected, it's not going to happen.
Yes, and that's one of the breaks. You know, like I have a client who has anxiety issues, and we know that is a big break for her. She can't get turned on when she's in her anxiety cycle. If you are worried about the 10 other things you need to be doing instead of sex, that is probably a break. So what can you do to create space so that you're not worried about what's going on? You know, can you schedule it in? I'm a huge, huge fan of scheduling sex. Schedule sex. So if it's on the schedule and you can navigate around that the way you would do any other commitment, then it allows your mind to kind of let go of all the other things that you have to get done. So again, you have to get creative, but you're so right. I mean, if your mind is going in 1,000 different directions, no matter how sexy the stuff is that's happening in that moment with your body, it's probably going to be a lot harder for you to connect because you're thinking, okay, I need to do the dishes and I hope this goes faster because I need to go pick up the dog from the groomer and I have to put the kids in the bath. And, you know, you have to give yourself permission to do this for yourself because you deserve it, because it feels good, because it's great for you. But it all starts with removing everything that tends to get in your way. And that includes your thoughts. So how can you create space to just set those aside for a minute? I know an expert who likes to say, leave them at the door. So it's not that you're convincing yourself you don't have any of those things to do. It's, I'm going to just leave all of these issues at the door when I step into my bedroom, when we're going to have a great time. And when I leave the bedroom, I pick them back up again. So then your brain doesn't panic like, no, you really have all these things to do. Your brain just realizes, okay, I'm going to take like a half an hour break and then we'll come back and I can panic again. So it's just a matter of giving yourself permission to kind of try those little rituals and see what works.
Great. So would you say that's actually one of your top tips for being able to put sex into your life? Like,
yep. Yeah. Schedule. Yeah. I mean, we all love this idea of this magical, spontaneous sex where you fall into each other's arms and your clothes melt off and you have this incredible sex, you know, and it's easy and effortless. And,
well,
you know, it's
9.5 weeks.
Right. I mean, you know, it's an amazing story and it's a nice ideal, but that's really not the reality of our lives. We're so busy. We're so plugged in, especially with these little things, you know, and that we all have this symptom of busyness. So we're always busy. And the truth of the matter is, whether you're talking about business, you're talking about family, you're talking about your life, if it's not on the schedule, it doesn't happen. And we all know that to be true. If you don't make time, you know, for self-care, if you don't make time for that important meeting, if you don't get that doctor's appointment on the calendar while you're thinking about it, it's not going to happen. So the same is true for self-care. Schedule your self-care, whether that's 15 minutes, 3 days a week to read your favorite book, or it's 30 minutes in the bathtub, whatever it is, or it's going to the gym. Schedule your self-care, schedule date nights, and schedule sex. And the number one, what do you think the number one thing is when I tell a client, well, you need to schedule sex?
Well, it's going to be a chore.
Exactly. Right. So it's either, well, that just makes it a chore and obligation, or, well, that's not sexy. It's supposed to just happen. Well, if it's just supposed to happen and we're talking, that probably isn't true because it's not happening, right? So we need to take control. And as for being a chore, the whole thing is you're carving out a container where you get to explore sexy time or intimacy together, and that can look like anything. One of the biggest problems that I have with the way we're taught sex and the way that my clients come to me and feel so much guilt around sex is there's assumption that sex has to equal we got naked and a penis went in something. Mm-hmm. But sex can be lying naked together and making out. It can be a sensual massage. It can be hands. It can be just mouths. It can be toys. It can be all kinds of different things. And the fun thing is when you schedule sexy time, you're creating a container that invites some type of sexual connection. But it doesn't have to be penetrative sex. It can be whatever feels good that night. But it's just a way for the two of you, or however many of you there are, to come together and to figure out what's going to feel really good that day. And it also helps to build anticipation. And that's something that I teach a lot of my clients is we forget that we need to flirt and build anticipation. So I can tell you
anticipation part huge.
Yes, it is. I mean, think about it. If I know that on Thursday night, my partner and I have set aside time to get sexy, whole day Thursday, I'm thinking about it and wondering oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to try? And we sext each other and we send little hey, tonight I was thinking about trying this, or hey, what are you wearing? Are you still going to be wearing that later? Or send little flirty pictures. And I mean, it gives you this opportunity to build this energy and get excited about each other because it's on the calendar. You're going to spend that time together. And sure, life gets in the way sometimes. One of you gets super sick, or you've just had a horrible day and you kind of have to, focus on the emotional side of things. But when you know that it's happening, you can start planning and anticipating and, making sure you've got your sexy undies on that day and making sure they're washed before that day, or pick up your favorite bottle of wine on the way home. So you can start creating the scene long before the time actually happens. And that is so important to making that fun.
Yeah, I'll share a little personal story here that I like to actually incorporate. And, I'm talking to you moms especially because I have a little toddler here at home. But, things are busy in the morning. I got to get my son ready for school. We got to make sure that we brush teeth. We got to shower up, husband, wife, getting ready, blah, blah, blah. And when I'm feeling it, I break out some of the best lingerie that I have. And I prance around and I get my son ready for school. And my husband's like, where are you going today? I'm like, well, I'm not going in this, but it's at least it plants in his mind what's underneath. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, he has an idea. Okay, this is what I'm coming home to. And like you were saying, are you still wearing that? What's the, I stopped by the wine store. Mm-hmm. It's just something that you kind of implant in there. And, he doesn't even have to comment. Sometimes he just looks and he just knows, okay.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah. And it also makes you feel good. When okay, I'm going to put something sexy on today, whatever sexy looks like for you. It might be combat boots and camo pants and a hot tank top, whatever makes you feel sexy. Just creating that space that allows you to be there, and be in your body and being present and asking yourself, okay, what would make me feel sexy right now? And there's something that I really, really love and I recommend to so many of my clients, and I've read some of my friends say the same thing, which is fake it till you feel it. So a good example of that is I have a client who's really super shy. And she's always afraid to initiate anything. And so she sends a lot of mixed messages to her partner, and he's never quite sure if she wants him to initiate anything tonight, and that kind of, so it's causing this kind of miscommunication. So I asked her, okay, if you were your sexiest, most confident self in that moment, what would you do? How would you act? What would you say? And so she practiced that, and one night he was in the shower and she thought, okay, if I was really, really super confident and really sure of myself, what would I do right now? And she was like, well, I'd get in the shower and say something flirty. And so she decided to just pretend that was her truth. And she got in the shower and they had this amazing session. And the thing is, you are still channeling yourself. So even though it kind of feels like you're kind of taking a shortcut or faking your way out. You're still truly channeling what's inside of yourself. You're just giving yourself a easier way to kind of approach that. So it's like, you know, if you want to do a striptease, well, how would a stripper walk into the room? You know, and then you get to like kind of play with that and be playful, and you don't have to get it perfect, but it tricks you into kind of being something that you know is inside of you, but often our thoughts get in the way. So instead of like, well, I'm going to walk into the room sexy, and then you start overthinking it. If you're like, well, if I was a stripper, how would I act? And it's just this like fun little way to kind of get you into that place and makes you playful. And you know, yeah, sometimes you're going to look like a fool, but it's still really fun. You know, it's fun to kind of share that. So I love that you're talking about putting your lingerie on and like prancing around, because it's that same thing. You're taking on that mindset and letting yourself feel sexy. And then he sees that and he's like, ooh, I think something fun's going to happen later, you know? And another thing I love to do is on days when I'm feeling really good about myself, or I feel like my hair looks great that day, I'll take a couple of sexy pictures and just save them. And then the next time I want to send a sexy picture, it's like, hey, I took this the other day, you know, and it lets us flirt. Because sometimes you just have one of those days where you're like, the last thing I want to do is take a sexy picture. But if you've already got a couple that you took, that's a fun little tool to have.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned something I wanted to comment on, the fact that when you do kind of take care of yourself, or like I was saying, prancing around and all day you're wearing this, it does really affect how you interact with other people as well. And not just how you feel with yourself, but you just show up more of an empowered person. Yeah. So do you talk a little bit about that and what it's, you know, just the empowerment part?
Absolutely. Yeah. Something that I see over and over again and that I've experienced for myself is when you start really embracing your sexuality and your sexual self, and you give yourself permission to be sexual, whatever that looks like for you. You know, it looks all different kinds of ways for all different kinds of people. So you have a unique way of being your sexual self. When you let that happen, things flow in so many other areas of your life. You know, as soon as you start feeling less shame and less guilt around your sexuality, you start experiencing so many awesome things in other relationships, not just with your intimate partner, but with your family, with your friends, because you're so much more open. And a good analogy is, think about when you've had a really horrible, horrible day at work and you come home, and how that kind of follows you. And you feel like you're in a funk and you just kind of don't want to do anything, and you're snapping at people. And it's because you've got this block, you know, or if you're feeling really, really stressed about money, that bleeds into all areas of your life, this like tightness and this closed downness. Well, the same is true for your sexuality and your sexual expression. You know, if you're really closed down around sex and you just don't feel really good about your wants and your needs, you don't feel like you deserve to ask for those things, then there's probably other areas of your life where you feel undeserving. So when you start to empower yourself around your desires and your boundaries and what feels good, you start meeting and showing up in all other areas of your life in a whole new way. You know, one of the number one things people find when they start really tapping into their sexual self is creativity just like explodes. And they start having all these ideas, and they start just like feeling so open in all areas of their life. And it's because you've removed that block. And now you're just like really in yourself, and you're allowing all aspects of yourself to show up. And there is nothing more powerful in the world than somebody who's completely tapped into all of their potential. And that includes the sexual potential. So, you know, I love what you said, Isabel, about how, you know, on that day when you've got your sexy lingerie on and you're walking around, and whether you're going to the bank and the grocery store, or you're meeting up with girlfriends, there's just that something extra. Like you feel like you're turning heads a little bit more, and you've kind of got a little bit more of a playful energy. It's because you've tapped into that. Yes, you know, exactly. Or like you take your spinning class and you feel a little bit extra motivated that day, whatever it is, you know, it's because you're allowing all of that energy to flow through you, and everybody else picks up on it. You're vibrant and radiant, and, you know, you're open, and you're putting yourself out there. And I mean, that's the power. That's truly the power of allowing yourself to play in that space. And so many of us are super closed down and feel guilty. So we can't tap into that.
you can't be, or I don't know, can you be in that sexual place the majority of the time?
I think so. Yes. Yeah. And what it really has to do with is when you're open and truly tapped into who you are authentically as a person, it's not just one or two little bits of yourself, it's all aspects of yourself. And so I know actually a handful of people in my personal life who are totally sexually liberated. And what I mean by that isn't necessarily that they like do really crazy sexy things or they have lots of sex. What it means is, you know, they are so tapped into, here's what I want, and I'm not afraid to ask for it. And here's what I need. And I'm not afraid to tell you no either, because I know that my boundaries are important. Then every single thing that they show up for in their life feels aligned and feels open and feels powerful. And it's definitely something that's possible, but it takes practice because we're not really taught how to do that when we grow up.
So sexual liberation then shows up in everything else that you do as well, because
Everything.
Okay.
Yeah. I've had so many people after we start clearing just these blocks and these thoughts that they have around sex, where they feel, you know, like, I should want sex more. I don't know, you know, what they're asking for when they say they want to do this. And there's just this kind of like heaviness around it. When we start making sex fun and easy and something that's easily accessible, I mean, so many clients have been like, oh my God, business is booming. My relationship is better than it's ever been. I stopped yelling at my kids all the time. And it's because you've really allowed yourself to be completely free in who you are. And that can look like anything that it needs to look like. It's your version of whatever freedom is. But, you know, total freedom includes your sexuality. Uh-oh, I lost you.
There we go.
You are.
Freeze there for like 30 seconds. So,
Yeah.
Okay, the last thought that I had was, you were talking about sexual liberation, or, you know,
Liberation.
Yeah, sexual liberation. And I was just thinking, okay, so like the things that we tend to strive for, you know, obviously money, we want success, enlightenment, and now we can throw in there sexual liberation. Or is that the pathway?
Yeah, no, I think sexual liberation is truly personal liberation, because to me, sexual liberation means you know who you are, you're comfortable with who you are, you know what you want, you know you deserve to ask for it, you set really healthy boundaries, and you know the sky is the limit. You know, you're constantly curious about yourself and what your body is capable of, and you bring all of that energy and that openness, that curiosity to everything in your life, and holy crap, world domination.
Love it, love it, love it. Oh my God. Well, I want to get to a couple more of these questions because we are down to about the last 12 minutes. And actually it's kind of a kinky question. I hope you're cool with that. I'm sure you are. I hope all of our viewers are. So it's actually talking about introducing a new fantasy or sexy idea to your partner. Like, how is it that somebody can, like, what's the easiest way, I guess, to introduce that to your sexual partner, or even toys?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I love this question so much because there's so many ways to do this, and we just kind of never really think about them. We just think, oh my God, if they find this thing out about me, they're not going to want to be with me anymore, or they're going to think that I'm a freak, you know? And so you never say it, and it sits and it festers, and it just doesn't feel good because you want to say the thing, and it becomes this like really big deal when it's really not that big of a deal for most people. So two things that I'll say is, the first is, when you're with somebody who is either an intimate partner or regular ongoing sexual partner, we all want to be rock stars in bed. Like, that's the bottom line. We want to know, yeah, I'm good at that. I did that. I got you off that good. And so because of that, you have to remember that if you can offer something to your partner that's going to make you just like go through the roof with pleasure and excitement and make you want it even more, of course your partner wants to know about that. You know, so if you need a vibrator in order to have a mind-blowing orgasm when you're having sex, then let your partner know that. And it might shock them at first, or it might make them like, ooh, I've never done that. And they're worried about looking like a fool. It doesn't have to do with you. They're like, I don't know how to do that. So that's where some defensiveness can come in, is people are often afraid they're going to look stupid or silly because they don't know what that means or how to make it happen. So that's actually,
I wonder how many people either haven't stepped foot in a sex store or don't even own like a vibrator, dildo, or anything.
Yeah.
I mean, there should be some kind of study on this, but I think there's a lot of untapped potential out there.
I agree. And, you know, so the whole thing is, let's say you have a bondage fantasy, you know, and you want to explore that with your partner, but you're not sure how to approach it. You have to remember two things. One, your partner wants to be amazing. Your partner wants to be a rock star in bed. So if you introduce something new and their first thought's probably going to be, I have no idea how to do that. I'm going to look like an idiot. So no, I don't want to do that. You know, that's just like your defensive mechanism coming up because we don't like to feel vulnerable. So knowing that, the other thing is often if we just say something really generic, people jump to the worst possible conclusion. So if you say, hey, I want to try bondage, and your partner doesn't know that much about bondage, in their head, they might get this picture of you like hanging from the rafters with like 17 different kinds of ropes and who knows what else. And they're like, there's no way in hell I'm going to do that. So one of the things I'm a really big fan of is using softer entrances to introduce those ideas and make sure that they really align with what you're picturing. So one of my favorite things is Tumblr, which most people probably know is kind of like a visual social media blog site. Tumblr is packed with sexy pictures. Like there's a bajillion porn sites on Tumblr. And there's one site that I love called ladycheeky.com. She just got named the #1 porn site for women, I think. But she has really tasteful, beautiful images that are just amazing and kind of span the spectrum of all different kinds of sex acts, but in really tasteful ways. So if I was going to introduce bondage, the thought of bondage to somebody who I've never talked to that about before, what I might do is go find some pictures that kind of look like what I'm thinking. Because maybe it's just my wrists tied to the headboard. You know, maybe it's some handcuffs. Maybe it's a blindfold and, you know, like my hands behind my head. If I can find pictures that actually look like what I'm thinking and then go to my partner and say, hey, I was actually thinking I might want to try something new and I found these really sexy pictures. What do you think? They actually get to see exactly what you're thinking without having to worry like, well, I don't know how to do these fancy ties where you're hogtied or whatever it is. And if you are into that, make sure you're like, hey, I was reading about these super fancy hog ties and I was thinking maybe we should try it. I found a class that teaches us how to do it. So that method is setting your partner up to be a rock star, giving them the tools, the information that they need to feel like, okay, that's not so scary. And then you kind of say, hey, I looked at this thing and thought it was sexy. What do you think? It also allows them to see, one, you're being vulnerable, but you're not being super vulnerable and saying, okay, my wildest fantasy, will you do this for me or I'll feel unfulfilled? You know, we don't want to put that pressure on each other. We want to set each other up for success. So whether it's bondage, whether it's trying a new vibrator, you know, whether it's trying like dominance and submission, like in 50 Shades of Grey, the more that you can give to your partner as a specific example and then actually have that conversation around, I was thinking maybe we might want to try this. Here's some super sexy stories that I found that explain like what I've been imagining. Why don't you read them and see what you think? And then let them have some time to sit with that. I have not found a situation yet where that doesn't at least open the door for a great conversation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And plus the picture is worth 1,000 words. So
yes.
Definitely check out that site. So it was cheeky.
Ladycheeky.com.
Lady cheeky.
Lady cheeky. Yeah. It's actually one of my favorite things to do with my partner is when we want to flirt with each other, we'll pick out 2 or 3 of our favorite pictures from that site and send them to each other. And we'll say, hey, later this week, I was thinking maybe we could try these 3 things, and maybe one of them is kissing and one of them is being in the shower together and one of them is super explicit. But it's just a fun way for us to constantly be sharing new pictures and new ideas. And it's a fun, easy way to flirt. It takes 5 minutes.
Well, we've talked on, you've actually given us a whole bunch of tips throughout the whole hour, but I was just wondering, what are your top 3 ways that you can actually help women tap into their erotic potential? Because it's all within us, and those of us who aren't as liberated, I guess, or okay with being expressive, maybe start top 3 tips starting small.
Yeah. So one of the first things that I recommend for people is to shift to a curiosity mindset. So a lot of times we're afraid of doing the wrong thing, doing something wrong, being abnormal, disappointing our lover. And it's all these kind of black and white issues that carry a lot of emotional weight. So when you start wanting to explore what sex means to you, what your, erotic side is like, adopting a curious mindset is a fantastic way to start letting yourself just kind of explore without it having to be right or wrong. Because if we're curious about something, it's not right or wrong, it's just all information. So what I might be curious about is, do I like doing sexy lap dances? I don't know. Let's see and find out. And then you do a sexy lap dance and you're like, nope, don't like that. But it's not that you did it wrong. It's just information. So start getting curious about yourself. Get curious about your fantasies. Get curious about your thoughts. You don't have to be super explicit. You don't have to say things that make you uncomfortable or do things that make you uncomfortable ever. But if you just start getting curious with yourself, that creates space for new information to come in. So that's really the starting point, is just get curious. The second thing that I would recommend is give yourself permission to really get to know your body. And I don't just mean your genitals. I mean, really, we don't touch ourselves very often. We don't, other than just kind of scrubbing ourselves in the shower and maybe rubbing our necks when we've got a bad day, and then for those of us who masturbating, we don't actually touch ourselves a lot. And there's so much information in our bodies. So one of the things that I'm really a big fan of is making sure that you set time aside either each day or a couple of times a week to just explore yourself. What does your skin feel like on your elbows? What does it feel like when you run your fingers down your arm and then back up? What about if you massage your arm? What if you use feathers? And just get to know every single inch of your skin and your body and how it feels and how it looks. And as you start to develop that relationship with yourself, it's a lot less scary when you start thinking, okay, well, I'm starting to feel kind of turned on. What might feel, good to do after this? Because you're already starting to develop that relationship with yourself. So I think touching ourselves is a really underutilized tool. And then the third thing is, people assume that we're supposed to just magically know how to be great at sex, and that's not the case at all. Sex is a learned skill. The same way that all of the different ways you can do sex, all the different ways you can fantasize about sex, all the different ways you can get turned on that aren't even sexual, we don't just know this like coming out of the womb, and we don't just magically know this when we, hit puberty. So give yourself permission to start looking at different things. You might look at 10 different things. You might read 10 different erotica stories, and 9 of them are way not your thing. But you've given yourself permission to at least try, and then you might find one new thing that you didn't even know was an option. So again, it's a little bit like the being curious thing, but realizing you aren't just born knowing how to do the full wheelhouse of sex. So, it's a really wonderful thing when we start getting curious and seeking out erotic stories or pictures or, new books to read. And you start getting all of these new ideas for, wow, I didn't even know that was possible. And then that creates this excitement where you want to do it more and we want to see where it goes. And so if you do those 3 things, you're probably on the right track for for really tapping into what's possible.
Which will then make it much more easier to introduce to your partner.
Yep.
So
yep.
Great. Start your kids. We're actually at the end, but I do have one question to ask you, which I like to ask each interviewer.
Yeah.
And that actually has to do with what is on your agenda for this year. I mean, the end of the year is almost upon us. But I feel that everybody has, at least some goal to accomplish at the end of each year. So what is your actual top to do for 2015?
Oh, that's such a great question. So I'm actually in the process of developing 2 courses right now, and I would love to get both of them done by the end of the year. We'll see if that's too ambitious, but I don't think so. So the first course that I'm creating is called Everything You Know About Sex is Wrong. And it's going to be a sex education course that's specifically tailored to women, but anybody can take it. And it's debunking absolutely everything you've ever been told about sex, similar to kind of how we talked about sex today, so that you can actually start feeling successful when it comes to sex and not like something's wrong all the time. Because really the way we talk about sex in our culture is we feel like we're always doing something wrong or we're not enough. So I want to completely rewrite all of that and make people feel empowered. And then I have a second course that's a women's sexual empowerment course. And right now it's looking like it'll be about 6 weeks, but it's going to be a journey that helps women overcome a lot of that self-talk, that body shame, libido issues, curiosities, and just even figuring out what are my options when it comes to sex, teaching communication skills. And it's going to be a really powerful group experience where we all go through this course together. There's live calls, there's discussion. So my goal is to get both of those launched by the end of the year so that I can just get this fabulous information out.
Awesome. Well, lofty goal.
Yes.
And we look forward to actually hearing about that in the group. So again, if you guys are not a part of the group, we are both in the Fiercely Feminine Entrepreneur, where we actually are featuring Dawn right now on Mojo Mondays. She's giving you guys tips every Monday about how to really get connected with your mojo. And I really want to say thank you, Dawn, for being on. It's been a great chat. It's always lovely speaking with you and just learning new tips and ideas. And I hope you, the listener, have actually gotten some great tips out of this as well. So thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you more in the group.
Yay! Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot. Bye for now. See y'all next time.